And our third coffee talk of the day, I'm sure a lot of you are wired already. Our composers, this is always one of my favorites, and this year I'm very excited to have a great lineup. Before we start, a big thank you to BMI for all their support in supporting the coffee talks, the Composers Coffee Talk, and to Doreen Ringer-Ross in particular for always assembling an incredible group of such talented composers. This year is no exception. Also, a big thank you to all the team of volunteers, the people that you see around in the blue T-shirts who sort of guided you up here. We have 800 volunteers this year at the festival. We couldn't do it without them, so a big, big thank you to the volunteers. And let's do these intros. We'll go from left to right, far left. One of the most unusual multi-hyphenates in the business today. He's an editor / composer, and probably best known for his work with Bryan Singer, editing and composing the scores for Usual Suspects, Apt Pupil, X-Men 2. He also scored Kiss Kiss Bang Bang Non-Stop. You can hear his music in the latest X-Men, Days of Future Past. Please welcome John Ottman. Next to John is our wonderful moderator, Doreen. And next to Doreen, someone I've been trying to get here for a long, long time. So pleased that he can make it this time. First heard his music, stunning score for the movie Mrs. Soffel, and all his amazing work with Alan Rudolph and movies such as The Moderns. He also scored Point Break, a lot of Robert Redford movies, including River Runs Through It, which got him an Oscar nomination, Shortcuts, a great score, one of my favorites, the Black Dahlia, and most recently, 42. Please welcome Mark Isham. And that doesn't even start to scratch the surface of his amazing career as a jazz trumpeter as well. Fantastic stuff. And finally, last but not least, such an eclectic group of movies here that he scored, including John Q, The Notebook, Akeelah and the Bee, the Jane Austen Book Club, Step Up, and then comedies such as Sex and the City, The Other Woman, plus classical stuff. Please welcome Aaron Zigman. And it's over to you, Doreen.
Okay, I guess we're going to start. So why not start at the very beginning? And I'd like to go from Aaron to John and tell me when you first knew that the music was your calling.
Well, 4.5 years old, my uncle was over and I played a Beatles record, and I told him to turn around, and I think it was I Want to Hold Your Hand, and as the music was playing, I told him I wrote it. So I first started as a plagiarist. But actually, no, I seriously said I started studying piano when I was 4 with my mother, and 14 was when I made the decision that music was going to be my life.
Mark, how about you?
Very young age, actually, before I even have remembrances about it. My mother tells me I used to sit at the piano and tell stories and bang out chords and notes and stuff. But it was also probably around 10, 11 that I just said, this is what I want to do. It was first as a performer. That was my first goal, was to play trumpet, either jazz or Baroque. The trumpet as an instrument spoke to me. I wanted to play Baroque, Clarino trumpet, or jazz like Miles, or both.
And John?
I didn't know I wanted to do this, actually. I'd wake up as, I don't know, like a 10-year-old just whistling stuff and making up tunes, and my parents would think I was a little odd. But I was just a kid who listened to film scores and classical music my whole life, and then it took a strange turn, and I've been doing it professionally.
So then let's talk about what everybody's backstory is. What were you doing before you started scoring films musically?
Musically, well, after I graduated from SC, in the 80s, it's when MIDI technology came along, and so I opened up this recycler, which is like the Craigslist of the day. It's this little book you open up and buy used stuff, and so I just taught myself how to use all the MIDI gear and stripe a videotape with SMPTE code, and then I took my friend's student films and I started rescoring taking off the ghastly scores I had on there, and just doing it as a hobby. And then, to make a long story short, I was editing our first feature with Bryan, and the composer dropped out in the last second, and we had a Sundance deadline. So I said, I can score this character. I helped create him in the editing room, and so that's the first time that the scoring editing thing happened.
That was public access?
Public access. That's where I met you, Sundance.
No. So was it the editing that came first, or the music, or was it sort of a simultaneous evolution?
Well, by default, I was in film school, so I was editing projects. But I would always, my inspiration for making my own movies was always some film score I would listen to. And I know that a lot of my sensibilities, embarrassingly, or I don't know, not embarrassingly, came from the original Star Trek series, because I was every episode I've committed to memory, and I got to learn how the music editors actually would reuse themes because they could only afford to score every 3 or 4 episodes, and how it gave it this continuity, reusing this thematic material. And I think I just sort of got that ingrained in my head and kept that sensibilities. And then, of course, when Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out, I became a Goldsmith fanatic, and then went back to all of his scores from the '60s and just absorbed him.
Yeah. Mark, what were you doing?
I had given up trying to be a classical soloist. Actually, I just found it a little boring, the whole classical world. You had to play what was on the page, and that wasn't what I was interested in. So I was very busy, starving to death as a jazz trumpet player and trying to make records and do tours. And Manfred Eicher, who had an ECM, the great jazz label, started a classical label. And so in an attempt to get any sort of record deal, I wrote some music for electronics and traditional Chinese instruments and presented it to him, and he passed on it. And so I did whatever every starving composer needs to do. You still promote it. You still let everybody know that you're writing, and you let them hear it. And I sent it, I think I took my last $300 out of the savings and bought a cassette. This really dates me, doesn't it? Cassette duplicating machine, and made about 50 cassettes and sent them out.
Does everybody know what a cassette tape is? Okay, sorry.
And one of these cassettes fell into the hands of a graphic artist. That graphic artist was doing the poster art for a film. The director came to his house to see the first draft of the poster art. This cassette happened to be playing, and he said, "What's that music?" And he was persistent in his love of it, and he tracked me down, and he offered me a chance to score a film. And I did it. I was scared to death. I'd never studied it. I'd never had any real intention to do it. But I made it through, and I was bit by the bug.
Ziggy?
Backstory, I guess. Okay, let's see. Yes, so for me, my goal was to come up to LA, and I picked UCLA only as a geographic. Anyway, so I broke into the session scene as a studio pianist and synthesis when I was 19, 20. And that was my first goal, was to come here and be the greatest studio musician I could be. And I think from there, I just kind of graduated to arranging and orchestrating, and it's too long, it's hard to abbreviate my story. I studied with my cousin, who was George Bassman, who's my mom, who was my grandfather's first cousin, and he's since passed, but he wrote scores for he wrote the song Getting Sentimental Over You. He wrote the scores for Marty, Postman Always Rings Twice. The orchestrator, was one of the chief arrangers for Andre Kostelanetz. And I was always fascinated with film, and I wanted to score films, even though I started as a record kind of sideman. Eventually I wound up playing on films and orchestrating for films, even during the period where I wasn't billed as a featured film composer. But George taught me pretty much everything I knew. We went through the Piston book together, and that's how he did it. He never went to conservatory either, so he was also a very good pianist. And so from him, I was producing and writing and arranging records for about 15 years, and then I got really sick of it as music began to shift in certain areas. I felt the real concept of mastering an instrument and somebody really being able to sing started to wane. Not that we don't have some great people and so forth that's still doing that, but I said I really want to be a film composer, and I wanted to be a film composer because I wrote concert music, and I wanted my concert music to be heard. And to get your concert music to be heard, as Peter Boyle will be sitting in there in the back row, we'll see who is actually having quite a bit of a success at it right now. A lot of success at it. No, we'll tell you how hard that is. And so for me, being a film composer was about being an artist. When I produced records, in the end, I was starting to feel like my ego was getting in the way. And producing a great record is really bringing out the artistry of the artist, but it became a little bit difficult. So I quit and let my managers go about 1999, and I said, and that was when that's right after I produced a cut on Christina Aguilera, and I had a bit of a cold spell, and then I got a little hot again, and I had about a year's worth of work lined up, and I passed on all of it, and I told Terry Lippman that I said, I'm either going to be a film composer or I'm going to go teach somewhere, and I had enough money saved up to last about a year and a half, and I had befriended Nick Cassavetes, and he had a movie called John Q, and he threw me the opening titles. He said, I can't guarantee you this, 'cause I don't have final cut. I'm sure a lot of you people know what final cut means. It's when the director has total say of who he's going to hire, not excluding the studio. So I took a shot and went in with a 75-piece orchestra a few times and wrote music into his film, and lucky for a lucky break, and also Dee Dee Allen, who has since passed, is one of our most famous editors ever lived. She and Nick both loved what I did, and I was able to convince Paul Brusek and New Line to hire me, and that's how here I am.
How important, you mentioned Nick Cassavetes, and I know you had Alan Rudolph as one of the key directors in your career, and you had Bryan Singer. How key do you think that is to the shape of a composer's career, film composer's career, to have that relationship in place? John?
Well, it gives you a certain stock, I guess, if you've got that one star director,
But these guys weren't stars when you connected.
Oh, well, I mean, what's the question again?
How essential do you think that relationship is to the shape of your career?
Well, I mean, as it grows, it becomes even more and more essential because you have a shorthand and a trust, and so it's the worst thing to walk into a project and not have the trust of everyone, and it's great to walk in and basically people are embracing you, and then you have a track record with that person, and so they're going to be able to go to bed at night not worrying about what's going to happen, and you can really say, I remember that time where that thing, oh yeah, you can basically get halfway through a sentence and just take a lot of shortcuts in terms of the creative process, and I guess basically that's it. It's the familiarity with the sensibilities of that person. And in the case of Brian and I, we kind of created each other's sensibilities by making movies together. So I know if I'm going to get thrilled or chills about something I just did, I have a pretty good bet that when he walks in, he's going to have the same reaction.
Mark?
Yeah, I think John hit a very crucial word here, is trust. I think most people who aren't musicians, no matter how creative they are a little leery of how to talk about music, how to deal with music, how to communicate their thoughts about music. And so if they find somebody that they have that relationship with, that they think alike, and that first pass is always feels good to them, they'll want to stick with them. And and that trust can be contagious. I mean, I don't think Robert Altman saw what I was doing with Alan Rudolph and said, I'll have some of that. And he trusted Alan, and therefore he trusted me. And I think the fact that I was working with Altman opened it up for Sidney Lumet, and it just, people see someone they admire working with someone they're willing to give, a bit of a shot. So I think it's a very valuable thing. It's a very fun thing. I think to have that camaraderie in the trenches is really makes it very valuable.
Ziggy, what do you think about Nick?
Oh, Nick is an amazing, actually, musicologist in his own right. I mean, he'll come up with a few. He'll talk about old standards on an occasion, one that I will not know. So music, he's a real music guy. But we're talking about what is this relationship between, as both you guys have been talking about, i.e. Elfman and Burton, and I think that's what you're trying to say. What the importance of that?
What I was trying to ask is how essential is that key relationship with that key director to the shape of your career?
Okay, so that's really the key. The key to your career is the prepositional phrase here. I mean, I'm like, Nick was actually, you know what, I'm not going to say this because it'd have to be off the record. But there's certain films that, whatever film they do, it's kind of you follow that pattern, right? So, you know, it's super important because I'd love to be doing more action stuff and things like that and in different variances. And, you know, maybe Nick will fall into that thing. But Nick's made some great films. I'd just say it's an important, you know, the trust is important. Everything that my predecessors have, my colleagues have said is so true. So I don't really have much to add except that you do develop a shorthand. You know, one thing about Nick, I will say, which is fantastic, is he likes to start it right at conception. I mean, I went on the first scouting location on The Notebook. When I was on the scouting location, what am I doing on you know, so, and then on My Sister's Keeper, he called me up when I was on vacation. Before they even shot the film, he goes, "Where's my theme?" And I had just gotten knee surgery, and I was debating whether to pick up the phone. It was midnight. I was with my girl, and we were there, and I was like on vacation, kind of respite, and I grabbed it. I saw his number. You know, of course, it's, you know, what we probably would all do the same thing or not. And I had to get back home the next day, and the next 2 days I crafted a theme for him. But I will say this: he usually likes my first drafts. Or he'll have something that he wants to be very specific about. But he's a wonderful cheerleader, and you do develop that relationship. I don't know if you guys found that your directors are like get excited about what you do when they like, you know, you feel that excitement, and that's so important. That's so nice because, you know, I could speak for myself. I mean, that's the biggest part of what I do is like. That's that validation that you get. It's not, you know, we do films or independent films that don't pay us anything, and we do films that pay us something, but that's not what I don't write music for money. I write music because it comes out of here. So when you get that validation from that, and you've worked with this person for so long, it becomes just an old friend, and it's like a, you know, just a very, very comfortable environment. And you know where you stand, you know where you sit, you know, you're not insecure about anything, and so that's a comfort in itself.
Do you feel like you're allowed to have boundaries, though, when you have this? We should talk boundary violation. What do you think? Are you allowed to not answer the phone if you're on vacation, or ever just say, "I can't do it this week," even though these guys support you tremendously?
Talk to my OCD other friend.
Yeah, I mean, it's a personality thing. I can't even do that. Even if someone I don't know, I got to answer the phone all the time. I hate voicemails. I'll never listen to them. So I don't know what at the gym. I'm just like, shit, you know. I mean, but Brian does have a special ring. It's like, bah, bah, bah. So I'm like, oh shit, you know. So.
And does it feel kind of like an electric current going up your spine?
Yes.
Or, yeah. How about you, Mark?
I tend to be a full service, you know, exchange in abundance. That's generally my philosophy. If I can give the best possible product I can, then people will come back and want to engage in the exchange once again.
I mean, isn't it, and Ziggy, maybe you can answer this, or Mark, because you both were involved in a recording career before you came to this. But don't you have to sort of surrender your ego in order to do this, or your sensibility as an artist expressing yourself in your own right, and be of service to somebody else's vision to score a film?
Well, on the surface, perhaps that may seem the case, but I'll tell you, I think most people in the record industry will find that marketing departments and record labels will be a much stiffer taskmaster than any director or producer and their story that has to be told. I've usually found if one is able to communicate well with a filmmaker, one has a lot of space to create something and a lot of room to offer suggestions. Whereas, you know, if Chris Bodie has a single in the marketplace, you're not going to drift off too much as a trumpet player from what that sound is this month. You know, there's nobody's going to back you. It's the pop, unless you're willing just to play the esoteric game. But if you have any interest, I think, in the record industry and being successful in it, you're in the marketplace just as much as any film company is, with the same restrictions and the same thoughts about how to be a part of the groups you need to be a part of.
Just for I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to get a feel. How many composers are in the room? How many filmmakers? How many other?
What are you
Okay,
doing
so
here?
it's a mix. All right. Ziggy, do you have anything to add to that?
Only thing I'll say about, when I was in my first production meeting on my first film, it was like end of '01, I was so relieved that I finally was amongst a group of people that I felt that were smarter than me. And I finally just lost my ego. Because making records, as long as I did it, and I did it for a while, and I made a lot of records, and it's just, some were fun, and some were just like, like Mark just said, there's a truth to about the higher-ups about what they're thinking, but I never felt that ego there or that transference. I felt it in my body because in making records, I still feel the same way. There's maybe 6 to 8 different ways to approach something. Out of that, it just is what it is. A song is what it is. You can't change the nuts and bolts of the harmonic content of a song. But a film, the possibilities are a lot more endless, and there's a bigger number of people involved. So I've always believed in the sense of, when I could speak about either the man upstairs or a higher power form of energy, I believe it's in the group. So, people in numbers and people with all kinds of interesting backgrounds that come to this resolution of what they're doing now in conjunction with you. I felt like an artist for the first time, a true artist, and yet I lost my ego. It's a kind of interesting dichotomy. So that's what happened to me. Then as time went on, I went through my entitlement stage, which lasted about 1.5 to 2 years, and then I moved past that. I'm much more these days back into the egoless thing, which is, I think, where I've finally resolved myself. Is just, there's no point in ego. If the piece isn't working, you may think it's working. If the director doesn't think it's working, it's great. You wrote a good piece of music or a great piece of music and save it for something else. But I have been challenged very much, at least 3 or 4 directors that have really, really challenged me in the sense of being able to, for me to keep my composure and to stop. We deal with all kinds of different personalities. It's nice when you are just respected, and that's really all you want in anything in life and work, so on. But I have to say that ego is really the thing you really want to put on the side, or don't be in this business.
How did you meet Nick Cassavetes?
That's a personal.
Okay. How did you meet your first important filmmaker? Was it Alan?
No, it was Carol Ballard, and he was the one that went to that graphic artist's house, and he called his line producer, and I said, I've got this name, see if you can find him.
So he found you.
He found me. Yeah.
Wow. How about you? How'd you find Brian?
We met on a thesis film at USC. I was helping a friend of mine whose thesis film it was, who directed it, do with the production sound. So I was doing the boom mic, and Brian was a PA on the film. And he was doing the recording, and he cracked some joke, which I laughed at, which is probably the first and last time I ever heard him crack a joke, actually. and we started talking, but I ended up having the film was sort of a disaster, so they disassembled the whole movie, and the director had me come on and retell the story, and then so Brian sort of saw that happen and befriended me, and then we put together a short film together.
How do you like your directors to speak to you? Do you like them to talk to you in musical terms,
No.
or
No.
dramatic terms, or abstract poetry? What's your favorite?
I think every composer is the same. You don't want to hear a musical analysis comment coming out. You just want to hear what they want to feel.
I think the most dangerous thing you can hear out of a producer or director's mouth is, I know a lot about music, and I'm going to get very involved. Right. And it's a nightmare because they usually...
That same chill up your spine.
Well,
right?
they usually don't know anything about composing music,
Right.
and they have a large iTunes collection or something, and and they'll say major and minor, but they don't really know what that means, so it's worse You know, I'd rather have somebody say it needs to be more blue, or can you get gray around the edges? I mean, that's more meaningful than somebody to say, you know, use a minor chord there when they don't know what that means.
My favorite is go to the tonic. I said, why don't you get yourself a gin and tonic? I actually had an experience a few years ago, somebody sitting by me at the piano on probably 15 or 16 out of the 33 starts there were, and literally every chord pretty much telling me what to do. So, you know, I didn't bail, and that was the biggest test of my career, actually. So I got past that, so I can deal with anything. That was the toughest one I've ever had. And in this particular stream of chord changes and what he was trying to achieve, which was a very heroic type of feeling, there was a particular chord that was, and Mark, and you would relate to this, but there was one chord that was it. And that was it. That was the heroic moment. Every chord in that succession of changes, chord changes within that key or any key, was weaker. There was no stronger chord. And every time I hit that chord, he goes, I hate that chord. So it was extremely challenging, but I made it.
Do you guys like to work off a temp track?
Temp truck?
Temp track.
I'm kidding.
Oh,
Temp truck would be good, though. If there was trucks
I
around
like
and had
that.
temp scores.
If they have food.
Well, yes and no. I've been on films where there's no temp track. I've been lucky because it's very, very rare. But Joel Silver brought me in on a couple while they were editing the movie, so I would score the film as they were cutting, which is extremely rare. But you know, the good thing is you can go to bed at night thinking, you know, there was nothing but just me in that, and so you can, like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, there was no temp score. I just had a blast with that. But most often there's a temp, and it's, you know, it's good and bad. I mean, it's good in the sense that it's a general idea of what the filmmakers have decided they want the sound to be. And if you think it's really terrible, then it's your job to be as eloquent and analytical as you can from a filmmaker point of view to explain why you think it might be a mistake. And then go a different direction, but it is good in terms of just a general roadmap. The problem is, and everyone knows this, of course, is the temp love and where you're down to, you know, notes and bars that you have to duplicate because well, the temp did that. The worst is when you're in the studio. Play the temp, now play yours. Play the temp. Now play yours. That's the worst nightmare. So you make sure that when you play the temp, it's in mono, and that you've all pre-adjusted it to sound like shit, you know. So.
Yes,
It's really
for
good.
sure.
I'm going to use that one. I haven't figured that one out yet. Thank you.
And they don't. It works because they don't really realize why. It just sounds worse. They go, oh yeah, that's old. And, you know.
I've also developed a little technique that if you have a director who has a real temp love, you just go through it bar by bar. You say, okay, so that's the cellos, and they come right in there as she turns her head. Wouldn't it be better to foreshadow that a little bit? Oh, well, that could be better. Okay, so now we have something okay, now here, as she goes through the door, the flute enters. Is flute really your favorite instrument? Well, no, I actually hate the flute. Okay, so it'd be better if it weren't a flute. If you keep going through this, you'll actually get 2 pages of notes that where this could be better, which is good because then they realize it can be different and perhaps better.
Oh, that's smart.
I prefer anything that's romantic comedy or action based. I prefer a temp to be there just to see what director's feeling. But anything to do with any kind of serious content, whether in an emotional sense of point of view, I prefer there not to be a temp and just demarcate the scene. And I've had these 4 or 5 films where I've worked on no temp because I've requested that.
Right.
And it just, you know, I don't want to hear anybody else's music. I don't want to be influenced. But romantic
Does that
comedies
stifle your
generally.
creativity?
What's that?
Does it stifle your creativity?
No, I mean, even if there was a temp, you know, it's hard to. It's a little bit of catch-22, but you know, I will say, to answer your question, there's you know, depends who's being temped, and it depends on the quality of the music. They may have temp something there, but it may be just not that good. But romantic comedies or anything that's what I call in the service end of filmmaking with music is romantic comedies pretty much, with the exception of 2 or 3 I've done, where the director said, I want what you do, and you know, I want a tune. Lovely. A lot of guys these days, directors, are afraid of melody and tunes. So, or they're very specific about what they want musically, especially in romantic comedies, because it's a genre. It's such a formulaic genre, and those are the toughest, actually, I find, to do,
Why?
because you are bound by the picture, and you are bound. There are so many opinions, I find, in that genre more than any other genre, because in an emotional sense, people, when they first hear your theme, and they feel a sense of they relate to it, and they feel connected, emotionally connected to it, then they start to trust you more because you've produced a feeling. In romantic comedies, basically, you don't get to that feeling generally at a certain point. It really is it's a formulaic art of filmmaking, and there's no wonder that 60 to 70% of films, or at least it used to be until this point, 60% are romantic comedies, and the other 30-40%. But yeah.
Does that plethora of opinion come from the splay of people in the production entity, or is it from test marketing?
Well, if you have two studios, and John and Mark, I'm sure, have all dealt with this. If you have 2 or 3 studios and a multitude of producers, you have producers, a director, and music soups and editors all chiming in on an opinion. So that sometimes can be very. You have to figure out how to navigate that and make everybody happy. But I think somebody else
And that's
can comment
before
on
the
it.
testing, right?
Yeah, the testing, it just depends. You want to test. The only film that I've ever been fired on was a film where it was tested with my final score, and it was called Smart People. And this was an art indie house film, and they tested it at the Grove. For why they tested it at the Grove, I don't know. But, have you ever had that thing where you're conducting on the stage and everybody's just like, loving what you're doing, and you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then all of a sudden, for some reason you're chopped liver.
Well, a lot of times it doesn't have anything to do with the score either. Their test
No,
scores drop for
exactly.
whatever reason, and then they have to blame something, so the score gets dumped.
The music's always the first to go out, by the way, anybody in here. When a movie's not good, or a movie's not doing well, or not doing what it's supposed to do, the first people to go are us. Then I believe it's the editor second, probably, or not. But that would be the next area. And then, everybody's got a job to keep. So, but it's kind of laughable, in a sense, for me, But anyway, that's my interesting experience about getting these.
That's why if we're having a string of test screenings and I'm already writing the score, and they know there's mock-ups out there, they always ask, can we throw some of the stuff in there? And I'm nope, because the scores inevitably will fluctuate, and it might be a down score or up score or whatever, and you just don't want to take that risk. I don't. I mean, I've done it before and held my breath and luckily got through it fine, but it can set you up,
At what point in your career did you get an agent? And how'd that go?
Right away, right?
I had one after after that first film. The first film, the director found me and hired me. And then a young agent at ICM saw that film and saw a name that he didn't recognize as being represented by anybody and called me up.
Who was that?
Brian Laux. And he moved to CAA and took me with him. We spent 15 happy years.
And then what?
And CAA restructured their entire agenting philosophy, and I had to move on.
I have a long, convoluted agent story that I should just tell as
Go
an
for it.
essay. But no, I can't tell the whole story. That's too insane. But the end of the story is, but the lesson from it is that, it's sort of a sobering lesson. Until you've got something out there that an agent can use to promote you, they don't give a shit about how brilliant you might be. I went to Richard Kraft the first time. We had finished Usual Suspects, and it was still in a film can. It wasn't going to come out for a year, but I had a cassette tape, of course, of the score, and I gave it to Richard, and I was terrified to go meet Richard Kraft because he'd produced all these soundtrack albums. Oh my God, it's the Richard Kraft, it's the guy in all the CDs. And he's like, look, kid, he goes, I don't know what this thing is. You know, it's like, it's going to come and go. It's a little movie. The music's great, but until, until your fee is up to a certain point, go somewhere else, some other agent, and when it's at a, 100, 200,000, come back to me. And I'm like, okay. So it was real honest, Richard Kraft, so I went somewhere else, and that's where the long story is. And, but then Suspects came out, and I think it was Elfman that went and saw it and told Richard Kraft and said, you should go check this out, and so, jingling, hey buddy, remember me, so that's how it happened.
Richard actually told me, why should I do artist development on developing composers when I can just go steal them later? Yeah. So anyway.
Well, that's true of any agent,
It's true. Ziggy?
Oh, no comment. No, what was the question?
At what point in your career did you get an agent?
Right away, actually, right as I was being considered for John Q, that it was when I had gotten the film, but there was anybody know what a kill fee is? Okay, so I was hired on John Q. I went through spending quite a bit of money on real orchestras getting the film, because I wasn't going to do synth. I mean, we know the difference between those two idioms. So the filmmakers and the producers and everybody liked me and wanted me to do the score, but then there was getting past Paul Brusek and Toby Emmerich, and Toby was just becoming president of New Line, and Paul was taking over. And so I went to a gentleman by a big record mogul named Ron Fair, who's and producer, who's been around forever, who I used to make a lot of records for, and Diane Warren, songwriter, were actually at my session when I was writing and conducting the stuff for Nick's movies, opening, doing these expansive, very thought-out demos with real live musicians. So Diane Warren called Laura Ingle on my behalf, said, you got to check this guy out, and I went in as I was having the film. What I learned later was that there was a kill fee, and I was asked to write 30 to 40% of the temp score, and at that juncture, they would decide whether to continue with me. The studio had the say, or director, both. So with whatever money they gave me, I took all of it, and I went to Todd A.O., and I recorded everything live for the temp score. And luckily for me, it temped in the high 80s, and I was able, because Laura said basically, in a way, that she said she got a call. I was from Paul. Somebody said, don't worry, this guy will just, sink and swim, and we'll hire one of your other clients. And but luckily that didn't happen, and I made it past the second jump. So that was my story, and then the rest is kind of history.
Okay. Did you tell your story? You did. Mark, you went first. Okay. What's the difference between the purpose that an original score serves for a film as opposed to licensed songs?
Well, one is tailor-made to be the soul of the movie, in terms of clarifying story issues and character strife and so forth, and the other kind of can create profound moments that you could never do with a score. Even though I'm a film composer, I'm like, if you can do it with source music, do it with a source piece, as long as it's not gratuitous. I mean, we went through this phase in the 80s or 90s where they throw in the source music to sell albums, which was it was ridiculous. But if it's something like The Big Chill or a period piece, there's a scene in this last X-Men film where there's this big moment in this kitchen with Quicksilver, and it's like, if I had scored that, it would be fine. It would still be a cool sequence. But by putting this this song on there, Time in a Bottle, it just made it a classic sequence. A song can often do something the score could never do.
Do you have an opinion to add to that?
Not really. I think especially pop songs just have a different tone that is very hard to recreate in a score. Even if you're setting out to do sort of a pop music styled score, people go to tremendous lengths, have dedicated lifetimes to expressing themselves through the idiom of pop music, and it's just different, and it has a very different type of communication. And certain types of filmmaking, certain types of directors just really can benefit from that tremendously, and certain scenes will just come alive with that tone, with that musical type of contribution.
Somehow you can't, even though it's not period, somehow Tarantino is able to do that, and you think, my God, if it was scored, it would be awful. You know, it's just something he does with, not even listen to that kind of music, but it's brilliant, you know, and that's why his films will just stay classic.
Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think there's just certain scenes that songs really evoke something that, you know, like everybody said here, that a score could certainly enter that realm, but not. There's just certain things that just feel better with and it's a resolution of with a song. I mean, nothing more to say.
How important is silence?
Good one.
Well, I've always maintained that two of the greatest things a score can do is start and stop. It really is. I mean, if you enter at the right place, it creates a tremendous effect. And if you wrap it up just in the right way at the right place, in other words, using silence as part of your vocabulary, I think silence is tremendously important. Spotting exactly where and when to come in, and when to pull back, when to push forward.
I think you have to earn the right. I think films today for me. Films sometimes today. I think there's a lot of over-spotting going on. But then again,
You think?
Films back from the earlier periods, film was like, music was nonstop. I mean, I remember watching my cousin's film, Postman Always Rings Twice, the original. He wrote score when the tea kettle pot was like, it was like cartoonish almost, you know. So, but I think you need to earn the right. It's great when there's silence. And if you have a great tune or a great piece of music, if it's played ad infinitum, it just becomes innocuous. If you leave room to breathe, because there's so many, you know, the doors creaking, the wind, the Foley, that's music in itself, or the trains, or whatever it may be. And also earning the right for music to come in when you've had a little silence for a while. It feels so much better than being forced down your throat.
How do you guys work that out when you know there's a whole battalion of sound effects, and you have the score, and you have made noises for the same scene? How do you figure out?
Well, a lot of
How
that's
to
up
weave
to
it together.
if there's a vision or not when they're dubbing the movie. I mean, you know, the problem today is everything but the kitchen sink on the sound effects mixer side is going up because they have their agenda, and everything at the kitchen sink on the composer side, and there's just no definition or there's no point of view of the scene. You know,
But you're lucky because you get to
I direct the
you
dub,
edit.
so
you're on the dub stage almost running it. With
I'm the only one
director,
there.
right? So
you know,
you're
God knows the director's not there.
At least you
Yeah.
get that decision.
Yeah, right. So, I
You
mean,
get
they're
pounded.
surprised half the time where I'm like, you know, this is not a score moment. It should be the effects.
Yeah.
You know, Valkyrie's an example where I didn't see the score as being a predominant thing. I just wanted it to be a pulse because also I'm very involved in the sound design. So I do have an agenda on the sound design spot as well, and I wanted all the typewriters and teletyper machines and all the gritty room stuff to be heard. But the problem with a film like that, because I had envisioned the film as being very sparse. Oh, but there won't be much score in this film. You know, I just want the reality of the period. But once you light that fuse, once you stop the score in a movie like that, the thing just died. So, so I just kept bearing it down in the typewriters because that was the way it was supposed to be heard. But again, it's just back to the final dub and whether people have a vision or not about, you know, if there's the example to me that drives me crazy is, you know, you're doing music for a scene that you're carrying it emotionally, even if it's a chase scene, it has something to do with the characters. But God, that Ford car engine you have to hear as loud as it, why? It's like, I've heard that sound before. It's not about that. It's not about the car. It's about the guy in the car. And so this is where it's frustrating when you see films where just everything just throttle up on the mix board.
I actually try and confront it head on because I've been killed at dubs. You know, you go in and you spend all this time making subtle moves and thinking that and being signed off on at the demo phase. Oh, and then go to the dub and say, what happened? You know, like the car is killing me here. So I try and forestall any of this by in the spotting session, and then in any meetings with the director and producers afterwards, always asking, you know, what's your concept for the sound design in this scene? And most of the time, I will get, oh, I want this heavily sound effects. Okay, well then, give me their number. And I've actually called them up and just said, well, what are you doing here? Oh, we're going to do all these low rumbling. So I don't do anything below 1,500 hertz. I mean, everything is just high and creepy. And I'll send you my first pass. Send me your first pass. And since I've sort of taken that on as a policy, I've fared much better at dubs, because some directors don't have the experience to necessarily know that it's going to be chaos at the dub if they're not thinking this through. Others will, and then they'll be advising me along the way. But I think it's a crucial step that somebody has to take a certain level of responsibility for, or that dub will be chaos.
Yeah, that's really smart that you do that.
I usually catch it, a lot of times these days, I just catch it in the Avid, in the assembly, and what you're working on, if you're, you know, or whatever post area you're involved in. I hear something and I'll call up, and if it's it's really fighting it, well, if I hear something I feel it's going to be imprinted and it has a certain key signature, I'm going to write in that key signature. So something sounding in F natural and I'm in E, well, E, that's okay, but if I'm in, you know, like just a unrelated key, let's just make it that simple, then I will go to defer to whatever noises in signature. And sometimes I've found, have you guys found this? People dialogue. I remember doing a film, Jill Scott, the great singer, was in, and when she spoke, she was in like E flat, and so I went into that key. She was actually, notes were coming out of dialogue, which is rare. It doesn't happen a lot, but I do hear it. So, but then when you're talking about the bigger action films, I mean, I've just had my heart broken. I remember writing an 80-minute action score, 110-piece orchestra at Abbey, and it was one of my favorite scores I ever got to work on. I don't want to mention it because it deals with this particular studio and filmmaker, but it was dialed down so low. What was the point? I mean, of going through that exercise of, I mean, we're talking about music, you know, triple forte, chimbassos, and just, they sounded like, I mean, you can really hear when a music is suppressed. Music naturally is supposed to be at a certain position. And you can take music down and it'll still sound forceful, but that's one of the banes of our profession, is we don't have, and getting back to directors with trust and long relationships, you can feel more at ease calling them up and saying, hey, you know, can you change that? That's really not
I mean,
right. That dial down is really, you're hearing it.
Yeah.
So
Even in films where you don't have that relationship, though, I mean, the composer is usually welcome to come to the final playback, I mean, of the reels before they put the dub to bed. And, you know, you can take your notes, and as long as they don't see you as a composer walking in with a musical agenda, and instead, if you can make your notes based upon a need of the scene, you know, put it in that spin on it. And it's not really a spin. I mean, I have to feel that way. I go, here's why I think the music should be predominant here, because of X, Y, and Z, not because I want to hear the music louder. Then they often will really listen, and they'll make that change, you know.
We could just keep going, but I think it would be great to just throw it out for questions for a few minutes before we have to stop. Yes. Hi. Talk real loud because you don't have a mic out there.
Okay, so we talked about some directors that don't really know music that well. So have you ever had a director that's just like no to everything? Like, no, I don't like that. But they don't really know how to articulate what it is they want you to do. And if so, how do you combat that?
I just get them to keep talking. If it's all negative, that's fine, you know. But just the more data I have, I'd like to get adjectives, and sometimes I'll have sheets of 2 or 3 pages of just the adjectives that they want, you know. And somewhere along the line we'll connect, and what I do will start to hit home.
Yes.
Can you talk about the difference between like a theme versus just a score, where, you know, a score you have a lot of just the background music sort of filling in, versus a theme like Braveheart or Star Trek that you would really recognize?
well, yeah, You want to know the difference?
Well, I understand the difference, but in terms of what dictates whether a film would necessitate that, or did the director specifically ask you to create?
Good question. I mean, pretty much any movie, but some movies, some movies could be better textural. I tend to prefer the 4-bar phrase as a tune. So, if I have a chance to write a tune, because I think, movies and music does, there's always this conversation about music being the third character or whatever role it fits. But Braveheart's a good example. It's one of Horner's, in my opinion, not one of it, it's his best score, in my opinion. I never got tired of that melody. That was a beautiful melody. And I didn't mind hearing it over and over. That's a rarity. Because to me, when you write thematic scores, I'm always concerned about the saturation of themes, about when you hear, first of all, you have to earn the right to get to that theme, and then how many times are you going to hear it in the course of a 6-reel divided up, or the whole story? So since we're storytellers through music, thematic writing to me is so important. I think the guy that does it best in the world is John Williams still. He's still, to me, our best tunesmith. And on Crash, Mark wrote a great, beautiful textural score to me that was just absolutely befitting. So melody in that movie would have been, to me, too saccharine. He did the exact right approach, and Traffic was a similar kind of deal as well. But there are so many films that can take melody that I don't hear it, and you just hear, to me, what cloth, fabric, notes, meandering. There's unfortunately great melodic scores I think are becoming far and few between today. A lot of younger, I think younger directors are a little more afraid of melody. And melody can be really strong. It doesn't have to be over the top. It can just be a beautiful, memorable 4-bar phrase, and you can also achieve textural with melodic. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but to me, I would like to hear to the thematic more, although I like writing textural, but I like writing a tune. That's more fun.
Yes.
I have a question for Mark. So I enjoyed the score to Crash, and it's funny that you mentioned it, but one scene in particular that I admired was the scene where she's, trapped in the car, and I really liked how you played against the drama with the music. Could you talk about your process in scoring that scene, and maybe what you talked about with the director? Because I think, it worked perfect, and it made me feel, even though it's just so much is going on, that I felt, there was a comfort there, and you weren't so much worried about, is she going to be okay? I think the music was awesome, so I just,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Paul was not very descriptive to me, but he did say a couple of things. He said, I want women's voices in this, or a woman's voice. And he said, I said, what should they be singing? He said, oh, I have no idea. I said, well, this is a story of various different ethnicities, and what should they be in different languages? Oh, I have no idea. So you figure it out. So I was petrified for a number of weeks, because literally we had no money. And I said, I wasn't even sure how I could budget a singer to come in and do demos, because that's not something you can demo with samples, obviously. Until I was in my car and a Moby song came on the radio where he had taken all those UNESCO recordings of field songs and done absolutely fabulous tracks to them. And I said, all right, I'm going to take a week and I'm going to do that, because that won't cost me anything. I can do demos of that, and I can just see what the answer to Paul's sort of ambiguous request might be. And that turned out to be the solution. I found these libraries of beautiful women singing beautiful, old license-free material. And I wrote about 4 or 5 different compositions, and then just played music editor and stuck them around in the picture until I found the ones that. Now that particular scene, the film I'd done before that was a big action film. And I was still sort of in the mindset of, you gotta be more literal. And so my first pass at that scene had this beautiful ethereal stuff, but it also had war drums against it. And Paul said, no, get rid of the drums, take them out. And he was right. He was absolutely right, just to go completely against the scene, be 3 feet above it, reminding the audience that redemption is obtainable, basically. Don't look at what's actually happening, just stay way above, almost in the spiritual, outside of this story.
Brilliant. As you describe it, it's exactly what you did. It's great. More questions. We have a few more minutes. Peter.
For all three composers, somewhat related to the thematic versus textural, but question about today, the percentage of your scores that you find are orchestral versus the percentage that are electronic elements. How are you generally finding that to be as compared to, say, a decade ago?
Well, I would say more electronics in my experience. I mean, to me, electronics are 10 times more laborious to write a score. I'd rather just be all orchestral because I can write much faster. It's all going to be reperformed later, so I can do some mock-up that doesn't sound so great and spend my time actually writing music as opposed to finding sounds and manipulating sounds and mixing sounds, and it can get very frustrating. And you suddenly realize, I'm not writing music right now, I'm producing something, but the problem is what you're producing is what everyone's going to hear. You're actually producing the final product, and then you're sweetening it with the orchestra. So and with the last film, X-Men, there's a lot of synthesizer in that, but that was a choice because even for me, Mr. Traditional guy, I just saw this would be cheeseball if it were completely orchestral. It has to have some sort of synthesizer basis to it. So, you know, my own worst enemy. But so there's a lot of synthesizer work in that. But that was many times it's not a choice. It's budgetary. But in that particular instance, it was a choice. You know.
I don't know. It seems to go in waves for me. I think it's probably 50-50 these days. But the big orchestral score, those are harder and harder to find. Just the spend that kind of money. People seem to be not able. Studios seem to not want to put that kind of money into scoring that much these days. You get the budgets where you have enough to overdub a few things here and there to make it feel a little slightly more organic. But I've done, you know, if I can't find an electronic solution, then I'll just say, look, I don't think you should do this electronically, but I'm going to do this with 2 violins and a piano, and that's what you're paying for here. You know, that's the kind of money you have, and is that going to be cool? And so far, it's been working.
Aaron?
Oh, yeah, it's you know, a lot of hybrids. I've done tons of hybrids. But I have to say, I'm most happiest when I'm sitting at the piano with a piece of paper and I don't have to worry about one electronic thing at all in my brain. It's just me and the orchestra. And that, to me, that's the biggest muse for me and bliss. You know, when I throw myself into the electronic world, I certainly have a few synthesis that I love to work with that are just amazing, and I don't and you know, it's not about stocks, presets, and hitting the thing that the synth that you go buy and store. It's about really processing stuff and creating your own sound and stuff. So that once you get into that process, that can become very fun too. But again, I'm most happy just sitting at the piano, and I've certainly had probably 15 or 20 of those where I could just, and I don't approach the piano as a piano. I mean, when I'm sitting at the piano, I'm thinking about the orchestra. So, and the balance and what's going to go on, and, where the violas, and is this going to be oboe, is this going to be, English horn, whatever. But I prefer the piano. I actually prefer the traditional, though I love doing the electronic too. So as Mark said, it's a 50-50.
I think we need to wrap this up, so I'd like to ask all of you if there is one piece of advice you'd like to give to a developing composer or a developing filmmaker, or if there's something you wanted to say today that you didn't get a chance to, say it now. John? He was so hoping to
Well,
go
we all get
last.
asked this question. Mine sounds like a trite answer, but it's basically, just do. I mean, really, the worst piece of shit little thing you're given to do could be the thing that leads you, in life, the thing you least suspect leads you somewhere else. And by doing that, it actually trains you to not have an attitude about the stuff you're working on, because we'll all get some crap film, and you have to sort of delude yourself that you're going to make it better And by the end of the film, you actually believe that you've done so until you see it on TV 2 years later and realize, yeah, it was a piece of shit film. But I think, but really, the more things you just do, no matter what it is, don't have an attitude about it and just do it. And it really, that the thing you least suspect will lead you somewhere else.
Good point. Mark?
I totally agree. I've always said produce, promote, and persist. I mean, just do it, then tell people that you've done it, and then do more, tell more people. And in terms of the interaction between a composer and a filmmaker, communication. It's the key. Every time I've gotten fired off a film, I've gone back and tried to figure out exactly what happened, and it's never boiled down to not being able to write music or not being able to do things on time. It's always boiled down to, the communication fell apart right there, and I didn't do the right thing, I didn't call the right person, I didn't handle that thought that director threw at me in the right way. It's about communication, learning to be
It's
a
interesting
really
that you
good
own that
communicator.
instead of blame. I like that.
You have to take responsibility for it. That's be responsible for the necessary communication.
Right. Aaron?
There's not much to add except that if you really want to do a specific thing, no matter what it is in life, whether it's scoring films, being a producer, being an actress or actor, I really firmly believe that that's the one thing. You just have to focus on that one thing. And if you can't, you can't be successful at three things. I mean, there are very few people that have achieved that. So, in fact, there's somebody in my life right now that I'm trying to, that I watch, and that person should be just focused in on one thing. And if you do that one thing and you believe in your writing and you believe in yourself, and also to visualize. Visualizing is a really key component to, for instance, writing, if you're writing a 40, 50-minute piece of music, and you visualize, visualization is so important. I find that to be a real key thing. So for the young composer coming up, is don't get sidetracked. If films is what you want to do, then do what John did and take off the score of a film and score it and keep developing the muscles. And actually networking is even becoming even more important. I have found that I used to be more reclusive in my earlier days of film composing, and now I'm less reclusive, and I'm getting out there more and meeting more people. And I don't mind. I like working with younger filmmakers. It doesn't matter what the budget is. Relationships are key. That's how I was originally trained. Is one of the key things that I think Laura Ingalls first taught me, which was about relationships. It's not about the film per se, what you're going to make, what it is. It's the relationship, and that I've always taken that to heart, and still take that to heart, and still practice that. And if I like the person, and they have a decent piece of work, I'm going to do it, if I want to do it. And if it costs me $5,000, $10,000 out of my pocket, I'm going to pay it, because it's a relationship. And that relationship, you may find, may be some incredible thing later. You never know.
You want to give them your email address?
No.
Thank you, guys. You were
That's
wonderful
why I'm not on
today.
Facebook.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Smart man.
A big thank you to John, Mark, and Aaron, and for Doreen for moderating. We're back here at 5 o'clock with Screenwriters. Thank you, guys.